Hey everyone, it's Jay. Today we're going to be talking about how neurons get turned on. I'm going to do my best to avoid any sexual innuendo, but you can have as much fun with the topic as you choose. Before we get started, you're going to need to have watched the videos on graded membrane potentials and action potentials. The link should be in the upper left if you still need to look at them. The function of the nervous system is communication. The neuron receives input at its dendrites. If it's appropriate, the neuron sends an action potential down its axon, which causes the release of neurotransmitters that will influence the behavior of target cells. So the output of a neuron is pretty simple. It's either on or off. If a neuron is resting, nothing happens. If it's on, the signal will travel down the axon that causes the release of neurotransmitter. The only thing that determines whether or not a neuron fires an action potential is the voltage at the axon hillock. At rest, the voltage is about a negative 70 millivolts. If enough positive charge enters the dendrites that it raises the voltage at the axon hillock to a negative 55 millivolts, or threshold, the neuron fires an action potential, which causes the release of neurotransmitters. As opposed to a single output, a neuron receives a lot of different inputs. The site where one neuron communicates with another is called a synapse. The neuron that releases neurotransmitter is the presynaptic neuron. And the neuron that receives the input is the postsynaptic neuron. When a presynaptic neuron releases neurotransmitters into a synapse, it causes ions to flow into the dendrites, which causes a graded membrane potential in the postsynaptic cell. Recall from the video on graded membrane potentials that they have two properties. They can be larger or smaller, and they can be depolarizing or hyperpolarizing. When we think of a depolarizing graded membrane potential, one neurotransmitter that causes that is called glutamate. When glutamate is released at the dendrites, it causes sodium to enter the cell. This causes a depolarization at the axon hillock. This is excitatory because it raises voltage at the neuron's axon hillock closer to threshold. So this stimulus is called an excitatory postsynaptic potential, or EPSP. Now, a single EPSP isn't going to result in a large change in voltage at the axon hillock and isn't likely to stimulate an action potential. But if there are a lot of EPSPs, a lot of ions are going to enter the dendrites, there will be a larger change of voltage at the axon hillock, and the neuron is much more likely to fire an action potential. So these graded potentials add up, or sum, to give a greater result than one alone. This process is called summation. What's shown in this cartoon is a process called spatial summation because the EPSPs happen at different synapses. A similar process occurs if more neurotransmitter is released at the same synapse. In this case, the process is called temporal summation because multiple action potentials happen in the presynaptic neuron over time. Now, graded potentials can also be hyperpolarizing. A neurotransmitter like the one abbreviated GABA causes chloride to enter the neuron. The negative charges diffuse to the axon hillock. They're going to lower the voltage or take it further away from threshold. This makes it less likely the neuron will fire an action potential. So this is an inhibitory postsynaptic potential, abbreviated IPSP. Now, a neuron is always receiving excitatory and inhibitory signals. Those signals work against each other. If the excitatory signals are sufficient to override the inhibitory signals, the neuron will fire an action potential. At the same time, if there's strong inhibition in one area of the neuron, that can prevent firing an action potential even if there's a strong excitatory signal. To summarize this video, neurons have a single output but receive multiple inputs at their dendrites. Postsynaptic potentials that raise voltage within a neuron are called excitatory postsynaptic potentials because they bring voltage at the axon hillock closer to threshold and make it more likely the neuron will fire an action potential. Inhibitory postsynaptic potentials lower voltage within a neuron. The neuron is always receiving excitatory and inhibitory signals. Those signals sum to control voltage at the axon hillock. Spatial summation refers to the sum of graded membrane potentials from different synapses. Temporal summation refers to the effects of a neurotransmitter at a single synapse. If we want to know what turns on a neuron, the excitatory signals have to be strong enough to outweigh all the naysayers trying to lower voltage at the axon hillock.